Raymond died on a Tuesday. Not the dramatic kind of death you see in movies, where someone gasps and reaches for your hand and whispers something beautiful before the end. Raymond Mitchell died the quiet way, the way a man who had spent 32 years commanding ships and giving orders and carrying the weight of other people's lives eventually runs out of fight. His heart simply stopped at 6:14 in the morning, while I was in the kitchen downstairs making his oatmeal with the brown sugar he wasn't supposed to have anymore. I heard nothing. That's the part that haunts me still. I was stirring that oatmeal, thinking about nothing in particular, whether the hydrangeas needed water, whether I should call my sister in Portland, and upstairs, the man I had loved for 27 years was leaving the world in complete silence. I found him when I carried the tray up. He looked peaceful. That's what everyone said at the funeral 3 days later, and for once, people weren't just saying what people say. He genuinely looked peaceful. His hands were folded across his chest like he had arranged them himself. Raymond Mitchell had always been precise like that. Even in retirement, he made his bed with military corners, polished his shoes on Sunday evenings, and kept his closet organized by color and season. The Navy had shaped him from the inside out, and 22 years of retirement hadn't changed that one bit. The funeral was held at Arlington National Cemetery because Raymond had asked for that specifically. He had written it down in a letter he gave me 8 years ago, sealed in a white envelope with my name on the front. Vivian, that's what it said. Not wife or honey or sweetheart. Just Vivian in his clean, careful handwriting, like even that small word deserved his full attention. The honor guard was there. 7 soldiers in dress uniforms, moving like they shared one set of lungs. The flag fold was slow and deliberate and heartbreakingly beautiful. A young officer with serious eyes placed it in my hands and said, "On behalf of a grateful nation," and I felt his voice shake just the tiniest bit on the last word. Raymond would have appreciated that. He always said the small cracks in a person's composure told you more about their character than their confident moments ever could. I sat in the front row in my Navy dress uniform, retired Commander Vivian Mitchell, 20 years of service, the only woman who ever outranked her husband at the dinner table, as Raymond used to joke. My uniform still fit. I had made sure of it. I wore it not out of vanity but out of respect, because Raymond had always said that when you show up for someone for the last time, you show up fully. Our daughter, Camille, sat beside me holding my hand with both of hers. She is 24, sharp as glass, and looks exactly like her father around the eyes. She didn't cry during the ceremony. She cried afterward in the car with her forehead against the window, in that private way that reminded me of Raymond, grief kept quiet and close. Our son, Marcus, sat on my other side. He is 26, newly married, and built like Raymond was at that age, broad-shouldered and steady. He put his arm around me during the gun salute and didn't say a word. He didn't need to. What I remember most about that morning is the wind. It moved through the cemetery in long, slow sweeps, rustling the trees that lined the path, lifting the corners of the flag before the soldiers folded it. It felt deliberate. It felt like something. What I do not remember is seeing Raymond's sister, Diane, at the grave. I looked for her. I genuinely looked. Raymond had spoken to her just the week before he died. I knew that because I had handed him the phone myself when she called. They had talked for over an hour while I sat in the garden reading. When he came back outside, he looked tired in a way that had nothing to do with his illness. He sat across from me, folded his hands, and stared at the rose bushes for a long time before he said anything. "Diane is going to be difficult," he said finally. I remember looking up from my book. "She's always been difficult, Raymond." He nodded slowly. "This time will be different." I had asked him what he meant. He'd smiled at me, that quiet, private smile that lived only in the left corner of his mouth, and said, "Just trust me, Vivian, I handled it." I believed him. I always believed him. What I didn't know, what I couldn't have known, was that by the time that Tuesday morning arrived, Raymond had already spent the better part of a year preparing for exactly what came next. He hadn't been building a case. He had been building a fortress, and he had built it in total silence, the same way he had done everything important in our marriage, carefully, completely, and with more love than most people could fit into a lifetime. I didn't know any of that yet. All I knew on that Tuesday morning was that the oatmeal was getting cold, and the man who liked it with brown sugar was gone. I set the tray down on his nightstand. I sat on the edge of the bed. I held his hand for a long time. And I whispered the same thing I had whispered every morning for 27 years, the thing he'd always groaned at because he said it was too early for sentiment. "Good morning, sailor." He didn't groan this time. The room was very quiet. Outside, the hydrangeas needed water. She arrived on Wednesday at 2:17 in the afternoon. I know the exact time because I was sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of tea I hadn't touched, writing thank you notes for the flowers people had sent, when I heard the rumble of a heavy engine coming down our street. My neighbor Dorothy was at the kitchen window. She had been there since that morning, quietly washing dishes and refilling my tea and not making me talk, which was exactly what I needed, and she said in a careful voice, "Vivian, there's a moving truck outside." I set down my pen. I walked to the window. A white moving truck the size of a small building was parked directly in front of my house. Behind it was a black sedan. Behind that was a silver SUV. Diane Mitchell climbed out of the silver SUV first, dressed in what I can only describe as her best version of authority dark blazer, heels on my driveway, sunglasses that she removed slowly, like she was arriving at something that had been arranged in her favor. Two men in suits got out of the black sedan. They each carried a briefcase. Dorothy looked at me. "Do you know those men?" "No," I said, "but I know what they are." I walked to my front door and opened it before Diane could knock. We looked at each other. Diane and I had never been warm, but we had always been civil, because Raymond was between us, and Raymond was the kind of man who made civility feel worth the effort. Without him, standing there on my porch with a moving truck idling at her back and two attorneys flanking her like bodyguards, there was no civility left in Diane Mitchell's face. Only certainty. She was 49 years old, 4 years younger than Raymond had been. She had his same jaw and his same brown eyes, but none of his steadiness. Diane had spent her whole life being restless in her marriages, restless in her career, restless in her relationship with her brother. She called when she needed something and disappeared when she didn't. Raymond had loved her anyway. That was the kind of man he was. "Vivian," she said. The word landed flat as a stone. "Diane," I said. "Raymond isn't even 24 hours in the ground." She tilted her head just slightly. "I know, I'm sorry for your loss." She said it the way people say "have a nice day," automatically, without any particular feeling behind it. "These are my attorneys," she continued, gesturing toward the two men. "Robert Chambers and Philip Ward. We're here because there are some legal matters that need to be addressed immediately." "Immediately," I repeated. "Raymond called me the week before he passed." She said this like it was a press release she had memorized. "He told me his wishes regarding the estate, the house, the vehicles, the business accounts, the investment portfolios. He wanted them transferred to family, to blood family." She paused for exactly one breath. "I have documentation." Dorothy appeared in the doorway behind me. I felt her there without turning around. One of the attorneys, Chambers, the taller one, reached into his briefcase and extended a folder in my direction. I didn't take it. "He called you the week before he died," I said quietly. Diane straightened. "Yes. And in that call, he told you that the home we have shared for 19 years, the business I helped him build, and every account we hold together belongs to you." "To the family," she said. "Blood family." The words landed exactly the way she intended them to, like a reminder that after 27 years, I was still an outsider in her mind. Still the woman Raymond had chosen over every family preference. Still, somehow, temporary. I looked at the moving truck. I looked at the two attorneys. I looked at my sister-in-law, standing on my porch in her heels, with that iron certainty in her eyes. And something settled inside me. Something quiet and deep and absolute. It was the same feeling I used to get in the Navy before a complicated operation. The moment when planning stopped and execution began. The moment when you stopped being nervous because you already knew the outcome. I reached into the pocket of my cardigan. I pressed one button on my phone. My attorney, Patricia Holloway, 29 years of probate and estate law, the kind of woman who had seen every version of greed in a courtroom, answered on the second ring. "Patricia," I said, "they're here." A small pause, then, "I'm already dialing." I put my hand up, one flat, open palm, and Diane stopped talking mid-sentence. "Let her take it all," I said. The two attorneys looked at each other. Diane blinked. Dorothy, behind me, made a small sound that I chose to ignore. I stepped back inside my house. I closed the door. And I let Diane Mitchell believe she had just won. Word traveled the way it always does in communities where people care too much about each other's business. Fast, slightly wrong, and wrapped in genuine concern. By Thursday morning, Dorothy had told the woman 3 houses down, who had told the couple at the corner, and by the time I walked to the mailbox that afternoon, my neighbor from across the street, Gerald, a retired high school principal who had known Raymond for 15 years, was watching me from his driveway with an expression I had never seen on his face before. Worry. Real worry. He crossed the street. "Vivian, I heard about Diane." "Word travels," I said. "People are saying you let her take everything." He looked genuinely pained. "Is that true?" "Everything is a strong word, Gerald." He waited, hoping I would say more. I didn't. That evening, Camille drove 3 hours from Richmond to sit at my kitchen table and look at me the way she had been looking at me since she was 15. Like she was trying to read a book written in a language she almost understood. "Mom," she said, "please talk to me." I poured her a glass of water. "There's nothing to talk about yet." "There is absolutely something to talk about." She wrapped both hands around the glass. "Aunt Diane showed up with a moving truck and 2 attorneys the day after Dad's funeral. You said 5 words and went inside. Our neighbors are calling Marcus. Marcus is calling me. Patricia Holloway called me personally, which she has literally never done, and all she would say is that you are handling it. Then you know everything there is to know." "Mom," Camille's voice dropped, "are you okay?" I sat down across from her. I looked at my daughter, Raymond's eyes, my stubbornness, and I said the truest thing I could say. "I'm not okay. I miss your father so much it feels like something is missing from my chest. But I am not falling apart, and I am not giving up, and I need you to trust me the way I trusted him." She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "Did he know this was going to happen?" I looked toward his old recliner in the family room. He had refinished it himself 3 years ago, sanded the frame down and re-oiled the wood, and said it had at least another decade of good sitting left in it. "Your father," I said carefully, "never walked into anything without a plan." Camille nodded slowly, the way she does when she's deciding to accept something without fully understanding it. "Marcus called that night. He was more direct. 'Mom, I need you to level with me. Should I be worried?' No." Aunt Diane posted on social media. I closed my eyes briefly. What did she say? That she's honoring her brother's wishes and taking care of the family estate. A short pause. She tagged 3 cousins. She used the word legacy twice. I sat with that for a moment. "Marcus," I said, "do you remember what your father always said about people who announce their victories before the game is finished?" He was quiet. Then, he said they usually finish second. "Get some sleep," I told him. "I'll call you in a few days." Meanwhile, Diane was not wasting time. Over the following 3 days, I received information through Patricia, through Dorothy, through my neighbor Gerald, who seemed to have appointed himself a volunteer intelligence network. Diane had made 2 trips with the moving truck. Raymond's antique desk from his study, the one he had shipped back from his last posting overseas, the one I had refinished with him on a rainy Saturday the first year we lived in this house, was gone. His truck was gone. The spare vehicle, a 4-year-old silver Jeep, was gone. 2 of the original paintings from the living room that we had purchased together at a gallery in Annapolis on our 25th anniversary were gone. Each time Dorothy reported, Diane smiled. The second truck came on Friday. A neighbor 2 blocks over called me to say she saw Diane directing movers into the house with the energy of someone who had been waiting years for exactly this moment. I was sitting in Raymond's workshop when Dorothy brought me that news. The workshop was at the back of the house, a converted garage where Raymond had spent his retirement doing the things that made him feel useful, restoring old compasses, rebuilding small engines, repairing antique clocks. It smelled like machine oil and cedar and old books, and I had not been able to make myself go in there until that Thursday evening. I sat at his old workbench and did what he always did when he needed to think. I organized. I sorted through folders and boxes, one at a time, with the small radio on the shelf playing old songs neither of us had ever bothered to learn the names of. I wasn't looking for anything specific. Or so I told myself. But somewhere in the back of my mind, in the part that had spent 20 years learning to plan operations in complete silence, I knew there was something in that workshop that Raymond had left for me to find. He had told me so, in the way Raymond told you things, without telling you directly. Just trust me, Vivian, I handled it. So I sorted, I organized, I waited. And Diane drove away waving. It was a Saturday evening when I found it. I had been in the workshop for 4 nights by then, sorting through 30 years of Raymond's organized life. Binders labeled by year, folders labeled by category, boxes that held the physical record of everything he had ever considered important. He labeled everything in that same clean handwriting, the kind the Navy had trained into him and that time had never loosened. I wasn't nervous, exactly. What I felt was more like standing at the edge of something large, knowing the answer was close but not yet visible, the way you feel in the moment before a curtain rises. I was going through a gray filing box on the bottom shelf when my fingers touched something that didn't belong. An envelope, thick and cream-colored, tucked beneath a folder of old maintenance records. My name on the front in Raymond's handwriting. Vivian. Not wife, not honey, just Vivian. My hands went still. I sat there for probably 2 full minutes before I picked it up. I carried it to the kitchen table, made a cup of tea I didn't drink, and sat down. Then I opened it. Raymond had never been the kind of man to write long letters. In 27 years, every card he had ever given me was 4 lines at most, precise, warm, and so completely him that I had kept every single one in a small cedar box in our closet. So when I unfolded the letter and saw 3 pages in his handwriting, my breath caught. I had to put it down and pick it up twice before I could start reading. My darling Vivian, if you are reading this, then what we talked around for the past year has finally happened, and I am gone. I am sorry for the oatmeal. I know you made it exactly right every morning, and I never said so often enough. I laughed out loud. It surprised me completely. A real laugh in an empty kitchen at 11 o'clock on a Saturday night, the kind that comes from a place deeper than humor. Still making me laugh, I thought, even now. I kept reading. Raymond wrote about ordinary things first. He reminded me to have the furnace filter changed before winter. He told me the truck's registration was in the glove box, not the filing cabinet where I would look first. He said Camille would try to take care of everything and that I should let her help because she needed to feel useful, the same way he always had. Then his handwriting changed slightly, still precise but slower, more deliberate. You know me well enough to know I didn't wait for things to happen to us. I made arrangements 8 years ago and kept them current. Patricia has all of the documents. What she doesn't have is what I'm going to tell you now, because I wanted you to hear it from me first. Diane is going to come. I knew that the moment the doctors told me what we were dealing with. She has been watching our life from a distance for a long time, and the distance made it look simpler than it was. She thinks what we built is just property. She doesn't understand that property is the smallest part of it. In the back of my workshop, on the bottom shelf, inside the gray filing box behind the maintenance binders, there is a blue folder. Patricia needs to see everything inside it. She will know what to do with it. I want to tell you one more thing before I finish this letter. The night you came home from your last deployment, you remember the one, 22 years ago, I was standing on the dock before your ship even came into view. I had been there for 2 hours. There were other families around me, all of them watching the water, and I thought, every one of these people is waiting for someone who matters. And I thought, I am the luckiest person on this dock. You have been the most important operation of my life, Vivian. The one I never wanted to end. Everything I arranged because you deserve to stand on solid ground. You always have. With all my love, and then some. Raymond. The kitchen was very quiet. Outside, the first cool breeze of October moved through the hydrangeas. I sat there for a long time, not crying exactly, more like the feeling after crying, when everything is still and soft. Then I set the letter down, walked back to the workshop, and pulled out the gray filing box. The blue folder was exactly where he said it would be. I didn't open it that night. Some things deserve a clear mind, and my mind was full of Raymond, his voice in that letter, his humor and his steadiness and his love that had always been practical and enormous at the same time. I carried the folder to the kitchen table and placed it next to his letter. I sat with both of them until morning. I called Patricia Holloway at 7 o'clock Sunday morning. She didn't sound surprised to hear from me at that hour. Patricia was the kind of attorney who kept her phone charged at all times and treated 7 a.m. Sunday calls the same way she treated 3 p.m. Monday calls, with complete focus and without complaint. That was why Raymond had chosen her 15 years ago, and why I had never considered anyone else. I found something, I said. I'll be there in an hour. She arrived in 45 minutes, carrying a thermos of coffee and the leather document bag she had brought to every important meeting in the entire time I had known her. She sat across from me at the kitchen table, opened the blue folder I had placed there, and began to read. Patricia Holloway was 61 years old, silver-haired, and professionally unreadable. In 29 years of courtrooms, she had trained herself to keep every reaction on the inside. So when her right hand paused on a page, I noticed. When she turned back to reread something she had just finished, I noticed that too. When she reached the last page and sat very still for almost a full minute without saying anything, I stopped pretending to drink my tea. Patricia. Give me one moment. She was reading something again, something she had already read twice. Her finger moved across the page slowly. Then she set the folder down. She removed her reading glasses and placed them precisely on the table beside her coffee cup. She looked at me. Vivian, she said, Raymond didn't just plan his estate, he documented everything. I don't understand what that means yet. It means, she said carefully, that what Diane took from this house over the past 3 days, the furniture, the vehicles, the paintings, she took under a legal claim that does not exist. I set down my cup. Explain that to me. Patricia opened the folder again and turned it so I could see the pages. Raymond established a trust, the Mitchell Family Legacy Trust, 9 years ago. This trust became the legal owner of this house, your joint vehicles, the investment accounts, and the business. Not Raymond personally. The trust. So they are not part of his probate estate. Correct. They were never part of the probate estate. Diane's attorneys filed their petition based on Raymond's personal assets. But the assets she claims he promised her were transferred into the trust 9 years ago, recorded with the county, reviewed annually by my firm, which is how I know every document in here is legitimate and current. I was quiet for a moment. Through the kitchen window, I could see Raymond's rose bushes at the edge of the garden. He had planted those the second spring we lived in this house. They still bloomed every July without any help from anyone. He had planted them the spring after his last deployment, came home on a Friday, drove to the garden center on a Saturday, and spent the entire Sunday on his knees in the dirt with his sleeves rolled up, working with the same focused precision he brought to everything else. I remembered watching him from the kitchen window and thinking, this is who he is when nobody's watching. This is the real one. The vehicles Diane removed, I said. The furniture, the paintings. Patricia nodded slowly. Were not hers to take. And the business accounts. Were never part of the probate estate. I sat back in my chair. The kitchen was very quiet. Outside, a car moved slowly down the street. Somewhere nearby, someone was mowing a lawn, the sound coming and going with the breeze. Life continued, the way it always did, completely uninterested in the precise moment when everything was rearranging itself. "Patricia," I said, "how long has she had to do all of this?" "Legally, she has had no right to do any of it, not from the first moment she stepped onto your porch." Patricia said it flatly, without drama. But that is exactly the kind of thing that looks very different once it is in front of a judge with the proper documentation present. So she was counting on me, not having the documentation. Patricia met my eyes. She was counting on you not looking. That sat between us for a moment. Then I said, "She doesn't know Raymond very well." "Evidently not." I almost smiled, not quite, but almost. "There is one more thing," Patricia said. She pulled a single page from the back of the folder. "Raymond included a specific instruction regarding Diane. There is a letter attached to the trust documentation, addressed to the court, to be opened only in the event of a contested probate hearing." She paused. "And there is a separate document I believe you are not yet aware of, one that involves Raymond's service record and a specific provision he arranged with the Department of Defense 3 years ago." I looked at her. She looked at me. "He never told you about this one," she said. "It wasn't a question." "No," I said, "he didn't." Patricia folded her hands on the table. "Raymond told me about it 3 years ago when he made the arrangement. He asked me specifically not to mention it to you unless it became necessary." She paused. "He said, and I wrote this down because it was the kind of thing worth writing down," he said. "Vivian doesn't need to know every move I'm making. She just needs to know she's protected." I looked at the ceiling for a moment. I pressed my lips together. Then I looked back down. "Of course he did," I said. Patricia almost smiled. "He also said you would probably say exactly that when I told you." I laughed, a short, real laugh, the kind that comes from being completely known by someone, even now, even gone. "Then I think you need to read it before we walk into any courtroom," Patricia said. She handed me the page. I read it. And for the first time since Raymond died, I understood exactly what he had meant when he said, "I handled it." The probate hearing was scheduled for a Thursday morning at the Fairfax County Courthouse. I slept 5 hours the night before, which, for me, the week after losing Raymond, was almost a full night. I was awake at 5, dressed by 6, sitting in the kitchen with my coffee by 6:30, watching the sun come up over the backyard the way Raymond and I used to do on weekend mornings, both of us quiet, both of us content in the particular silence that belongs to people who have been together long enough to stop needing to fill it. Camille arrived at 7:15. She drove up from Richmond the night before and slept in her old room. She appeared in the kitchen doorway in her work clothes. She had taken the morning off and poured herself a coffee and sat down next to me without saying anything. We watched the backyard together for a few minutes. Then she said, "Are you ready?" "I've been ready since Wednesday afternoon," I said. She almost smiled. "Dad would say that." "I know," I said. "I learned from the best." Marcus met us at the courthouse with his wife, Elena, a quiet, thoughtful woman who had brought flowers to the house twice this week without being asked, and who had the good sense to say very little while meaning a great deal. Gerald from across the street was there. Dorothy was there with her husband. 3 women I had served with in the Navy had driven up from Virginia Beach Chief Petty Officer Renee Caldwell, who I had served alongside for 7 years, Lieutenant Commander Sharon Foster, and Master Chief Beverly Hayes, who had sent a card that said simply, "We've got your 6, Commander." I had not asked any of them to come. They came anyway. That is the thing about people who have served together. You don't have to ask. Inside the courtroom, Diane arrived as though the space had been designed for her entrance. Cream blazer, blonde hair perfectly arranged, flanked by Chambers and Ward, who had added a 3rd attorney to their team since Wednesday. She carried a leather portfolio and wore the expression of someone who had already mentally cashed the checks. She saw me, and her smile widened just slightly. I imagine I looked exactly the way she hoped I would look: composed, quiet, contained. The kind of calm she had mistaken since Wednesday for surrender. I found out later she had called at least 4 members of the extended Mitchell family the night before to tell them the hearing was a formality. One of Raymond's cousins texted Camille that Diane had said, "Vivian won't fight it. She never had the backbone Raymond did." I let that go. Judge Catherine Marsh entered at exactly 9 o'clock. She was 63, small, and moved through her courtroom with the particular economy of a person who has never had a single moment to waste. She sat, arranged her materials, and looked at both tables in one sweeping glance that took in everything and revealed nothing. Diane's lead attorney, Chambers, presented first. He was polished and thorough, a good attorney in the way that a well-made tool is good, effective when pointed at the right problem. He spoke about Raymond's intentions, family legacy, blood relationships, the phone call the week before Raymond's death. He presented a signed affidavit from Diane describing the call in detail. It was a confident presentation. When he finished, Patricia stood. "Your Honor," she said, "we have no objection to the petition as it relates to assets belonging to Commander Mitchell's probate estate." Chambers smiled. He turned a page in his portfolio. He thought we were done. "However," Patricia continued, "we have significant questions about which assets those actually are." The smile faded. Patricia placed a certified document on the clerk's desk. The Mitchell Family Legacy Trust was established 9 years ago and recorded with Fairfax County. It was reviewed and updated annually. I can provide the recording information, the review history, and the attestation from the county recorder's office. She placed a second document on the desk. This trust is the legal owner of the residence on Cresthaven Drive. Both vehicles registered to Commander Mitchell at the time of his passing, the investment accounts listed in Exhibit B, and the business entity known as Mitchell Marine Consulting. The courtroom was very quiet. Judge Marsh looked at Chambers. "Counselor, were you aware of this trust?" Chambers had gone still. He leaned toward his co-counsel and said something in a low voice. His co-counsel opened a binder and began flipping pages. Nothing matched. He opened another binder. Diane leaned toward Chambers. I could see her lips moving. He didn't look at her. "Your Honor," Chambers said carefully, "we were not presented with documentation of a trust during the discovery process." "The trust," Patricia said evenly, "has been publicly recorded with Fairfax County for 9 years. The recording number is on the document in your hand, Your Honor. Any title search would have returned it." Judge Marsh looked at Chambers over the top of her glasses. She said nothing. She didn't have to. "Furthermore," Patricia continued, "the items removed from the residence by Ms. Mitchell between Wednesday and Friday of this week, specifically 1 antique desk, 1 pickup truck, 1 Jeep, and 2 paintings valued at a combined $47,000, were removed from property belonging to the trust, not from the probate estate." Diane said, "What?" not quietly, out loud in a courtroom. Her attorney touched her arm. She sat back. Judge Marsh held up one hand and looked at the document Patricia had submitted. She read quietly for nearly 2 minutes. The only sound in the courtroom was the soft, steady clicking of the court reporter's machine, and then even that stopped because the court reporter had looked up. She looked at me. I looked back at her. The judge set the document down. "Mr. Chambers," she said, "before this court proceeds, I want to be very precise. Did your team conduct an independent title search before filing this petition?" A pause. "We relied on information provided by our client," Chambers said. Judge Marsh made a single note in the margin of the document in front of her. Then she looked at Patricia. "There is a secondary matter, Your Honor," Patricia said, "regarding a provision Commander Mitchell arranged with the Department of Defense 3 years ago." Diane's head turned toward Patricia so fast I thought I heard it. Patricia placed a third document on the clerk's desk. Commander Mitchell held a classified government contract through Mitchell Marine Consulting for the past 11 years. 3 years ago, he worked directly with the Department of Defense to establish a survivorship provision, a legal instrument that, in the event of his death, transfers operational control, and all associated government contract rights exclusively to his designated successor. She paused. That designation is not part of the probate estate. It is a federal provision, administered directly by the Department of Defense, and it has already been processed. The room was very still. The designated successor, Patricia said, is Vivian Mitchell. Camille reached over and took my hand under the table. I didn't move my face. I had been in rooms like this one before, rooms where everything depended on keeping your composure, and I knew how to sit still while the world shifted around you. Diane was staring at me. I did not look at her. Judge Marsh closed the folder in front of her and removed her glasses. She looked at Diane Mitchell for a long, quiet moment. Then she looked at Chambers. "Counselor," she said, "this court cannot distribute assets that are not legally part of the probate estate. The trust documentation is valid, properly recorded, and apparently has been available for public review for 9 years. She placed both hands flat on her desk. "I would strongly suggest that you advise your client to consult with independent counsel regarding the items she removed from the property this week." Chambers said nothing. Diane said nothing. Patricia stood. "Your Honor, we are not asking the court to take any punitive action today. We simply ask that the court decline to distribute the assets listed in the petition, as none of them belong to the probate estate." Judge Marsh picked up her gavel. "The petition is denied," she said. "The assets listed therein are not part of Commander Raymond Mitchell's probate estate and are not subject to distribution under these proceedings." The gavel came down once. The sound was not dramatic, it was simply final. And that, I found, was exactly the right way for it to happen. I had spent 20 years in the Navy watching people expect victory to arrive loudly, with flags and ceremonies and applause. The truth was that the most decisive moments I had ever witnessed arrived quietly. A single order given without raising your voice. A door closed softly on something that was finished. A judge's gavel striking once, with nothing extra added. Raymond used to say that you could judge the quality of an outcome by how little noise it made. The good ones didn't need fanfare. They simply were. For a moment, nobody in the courtroom moved. Diane sat with her hands in her lap and stared at the table in front of her. She was not crying. She was not angry, at least not visibly. She wore the expression of a person who had walked into a room expecting to find it one way and discovered it was arranged entirely differently. All the furniture in unexpected places. Nothing where she had been certain it would be. Chambers quietly closed his portfolio. His co-counsel gathered papers without speaking. The third attorney they had added for the hearing was already packing his briefcase, methodical and expressionless, the way professionals manage the aftermath of things that did not go as planned. I watched Diane for a moment. Just one moment. And then I looked away, because there was nothing I needed to find in her face that I hadn't already made peace with. This was not a victory I wanted to celebrate. Raymond had never celebrated at another person's expense, and I was not going to start now. What I felt, sitting at that table with Patricia beside me and Camille behind me and the gavel still ringing in the air, was something much quieter than triumph. It was relief. And beneath that, something that felt almost like gratitude, not for what Diane had done, but for what Raymond had been. For the kind of love that sees trouble coming from a distance and quietly, completely, builds a wall between it and the person it treasures most. Outside the courtroom, the hallway was full of people who had come to watch something they didn't fully understand. Several of them had expected a fight, raised voices, tears, someone making a scene. What they got instead was a quiet woman in a navy blazer who walked out of a courtroom with her daughter on one side and her attorney on the other, and did not pause for anyone. Dorothy found me near the elevator. She hugged me without saying anything first, which was the right instinct. Dorothy had always had that particular gift. She knew when words added something, and when they just got in the way. Gerald shook my hand with both of his. His eyes were bright. "Raymond knew," he said. "It wasn't a question." "He always knew," I said. Renee Caldwell, my old shipmate, fell into step beside me as we walked toward the exit. She was still built like someone who could handle whatever came next, the same way she had been on every ship we had served on together. "Commander," she said, the old title landing soft and familiar between us, like something we had both kept in a drawer all these years and just now had occasion to use again. "Well done." "I didn't do anything," I said. "You waited," she said. "That's the hardest thing. Anybody can act when they're angry. It takes real discipline to hold still." She was right. It was. I had learned that the hard way, over years in the Navy where the instinct to move quickly was often the most dangerous one you had. The best operators I had ever known were the ones who could hold their position in complete stillness while everything around them moved. Raymond had held his position for 9 years. Marcus was outside on the courthouse steps with Alina. He looked like a man who had been holding his breath for a week and had just been told he could stop. He hugged me for a long time without saying anything, and then he pulled back and looked at me with his father's eyes, steady, searching, already processing. "He knew the whole time," Marcus said. "Since before we did," I said. "That is both very comforting and slightly unsettling." "That," I said, "was your father in one sentence." Alina handed me a coffee she had brought in a travel cup, and the four of us, me, Camille, Marcus, and Alina, stood on those courthouse steps in the October morning and drank coffee and said very little, and it was one of the most peaceful 10 minutes I had experienced since the previous Tuesday. I thought about Raymond the whole time. I thought about the way he used to stand on the dock before I came home, 2 hours early. He had written in that letter. I thought about 19 years of Sunday mornings in that kitchen. I thought about the rose bushes he planted and the recliner he refinished and the oatmeal with brown sugar he wasn't supposed to have. I thought about a man who had spent his whole life commanding ships and directing operations and carrying enormous responsibilities, and who, in his final year, had quietly, carefully, completely turned all of that discipline toward protecting the woman he loved. Not as a grand gesture. Not as a statement. Simply because that was who he was, and that was what you do when you love someone completely. You make sure the ground beneath them will hold, long after you are no longer there to stand beside them. That thought made something in my chest ache and settle at the same time. It felt, in the most ordinary and profound way, exactly like being loved. Patricia called me on a Sunday evening. The certified letter from the Department of Defense was delivered to Diane's address this morning, she said. I was in Raymond's workshop, sorting through the last of the boxes. I had found, tucked inside a coffee can on the top shelf, a small collection of things I hadn't expected, ticket stubs from a concert we had attended 15 years ago, a photograph of the two of us on our honeymoon in San Diego, a pressed flower from Camille's first birthday. Raymond had kept all of it in that coffee can on his workshop shelf, hidden in plain sight. I sat with the photograph for a long time. "Vivian," Patricia said, "did you hear me?" "I heard you," I said. "What does the letter say?" It notifies her that Mitchell Marine Consulting's government contracts have been officially transferred under the survivorship provision. It also outlines that the vehicles and personal property she removed from the trust-held property constitute improper removal of trust assets, and provides a formal timeline for return or financial restitution. How long does she have? 30 days. I set the photograph down carefully on the workbench beside the coffee can. Also, Patricia said, the Department of Defense letter includes a secondary notice. The classified consulting contract, the one that transfers to you, carries a retroactive clause that Raymond's attorneys negotiated 3 years ago. Any disruption to the trust property during the 60-day period following his death triggers an automatic federal review. I was quiet for a moment. Raymond wrote that in 3 years ago. Yes. He knew she would move fast. He planned for exactly that, Patricia said, to the letter. I looked at the workshop around me, the organized shelves, the labeled boxes, the old radio that still worked, the small window above the workbench where the late afternoon light came through at exactly the right angle every October. Raymond had stood in this room for 19 years. He had built things here, fixed things, thought things through. He had planned this here. "Patricia," I said. "When Diane calls me, and she will, what do I say?" A short pause. "That's entirely up to you." She called at 9:43 that same evening. I was in the family room, in Raymond's recliner, with a book I hadn't been reading. The phone rang and I looked at the screen, and even though I expected it, the sight of her name still sent a small current through my chest. I answered. For a moment, neither of us said anything. Then Diane said my name. She said it differently than she had said it on my porch. She said it the way I had heard grown people say things when the ground had shifted under them and they were still finding their footing. "Vivian." "Diane," I said. "I got a letter." "I know." A long pause. I could hear her breathing. In 27 years of knowing this woman from a careful distance always, I had never once heard her sound like this. Uncertain, untethered. "I didn't know about the trust," she said. "I know. Raymond never told me." "He told me," I said quietly. "He just didn't tell you everything." Another silence. "The attorneys said the furniture," she stopped. "They said what I took." "Yes. I have to return it. You have 30 days. She went quiet again. When she spoke, her voice had lost whatever was left of its polish. "I thought he wanted me to have it. He called me that week and he said the family should be taken care of." I took a breath. Raymond did want the family taken care of, Diane. He spent 9 years making sure of it. I paused. But he understood the difference between taking care of someone and handing them something they hadn't earned. She didn't say anything. "He loved you," I said. "He always loved you. He talked about you more than you probably know, but he also knew you." The line was quiet for a long time. Then, very quietly, Diane said, "What do I do now?" I looked across the family room toward the kitchen, where the oatmeal pot was still on the stove, where his crossword puzzle was still on the table, where 27 years of an ordinary and extraordinary life had been lived. "That," I said, "is entirely up to you." I did not say it cruelly. I said it the way Raymond would have said it, steady, honest, without the need to add anything more. We hung up without a goodbye. I sat in his recliner for a long time after that, in the quiet house, with the book in my lap and the lamp on, and the world outside going about its business, as it always did, indifferent to what had just shifted inside these walls. I thought about the phone call. I thought about Diane's voice. I thought about Raymond, who had loved his sister and known his sister and understood, with the precision of a man who had spent his life planning operations in uncertain conditions, that loving someone and trusting them completely are two different things. He had loved her anyway. He had planned for her anyway. He had left her something, not everything, but something, because he was that kind of man. I thought about all of it. And then I got up, turned off the lamp, and went to bed. Winter came gently that year. By November, the rose bushes Raymond planted had gone quiet for the season, and the maple tree in the front yard had dropped its last leaf, and the kind of cold that makes you pull your coat tighter had settled over Fairfax the way it always does, gradual and familiar, like an old friend who doesn't need to announce themselves. Life after the hearing was quieter than I expected, and fuller than I feared. There was paperwork. There is always paperwork after a life like Raymond's: insurance, accounts, legal transfers, trust administration, the slow, careful process of understanding the full scope of what he had built and what he had left behind. Patricia and I met every Tuesday afternoon at the office downtown, working through the documents one section at a time. Mitchell Marine Consulting was still operating. Raymond had built it with 2 people, himself and a former Navy colleague named Peter Greer, and Peter had kept things running in the weeks since Raymond's death with a steadiness that I suspected Raymond had also somehow planned for. The first time I walked into the office after the hearing, Peter looked at me the way Rick had looked at Margaret in the story I mentioned, like a man who had been hopping for exactly this, but hadn't wanted to say so. "Commander," he said. "Peter," I said, "tell me everything." He told me everything. Mitchell Marine Consulting worked with municipalities, port authorities, and federal agencies on maritime safety systems. The kind of work that wasn't glamorous and didn't make news, but that mattered enormously to the people whose equipment had to work every single time. Raymond had always said there was more dignity in useful work than in impressive work. This was both. By December, I had met with every client and understood every contract and made two decisions. The first was that I would run the business myself, at least for the first year, because that was what Raymond would have done, and because the work was meaningful, and because I had spent 20 years in the Navy and was not afraid of hard things. The second decision was smaller, but felt important in the way small things sometimes do. I refinished Raymond's recliner. He had told me it had another decade of good sitting left in it, and he was right about most things, but the armrests had worn and the wood needed attention. I spent a weekend in the workshop doing it myself, sanding, oiling, the slow, satisfying work of making something useful again. I was not especially skilled at it. Raymond would have done it better. But I did it, and it held, and that felt like enough. Diane returned the furniture and the vehicles in 3 separate trips over the following 3 weeks. She did not come herself. She sent movers. The paintings were the last things to come back, and when they were rehung in the living room, the 2 from the Annapolis Gallery, the ones we had bought on our 25th anniversary, I sat across from them for a long time and thought about that day. Raymond had stood in front of the smaller one for 20 minutes. He had not said anything. He had simply looked at it with that particular quiet attention he gave to things he found beautiful, and then he had bought it without negotiating, which was unusual for him. I had teased him about it on the drive home. He had said, "Some things are worth exactly what they cost." I thought about that on the day the painting went back up on the wall. Some things are worth exactly what they cost. In January, Camille came to visit for a long weekend. She helped me go through the last of Raymond's personal belongings, a process I had been postponing, because postponing it was the last reasonable thing I could do. We sat on the floor of his closet for an afternoon, sorting his Navy uniforms and his civilian clothes, and the collection of old hats he had kept in a box at the top shelf, even though he almost never wore them. "Mom," Camille said at one point, holding up a faded Virginia Tech sweatshirt I didn't recognize. "Did you know he had this?" "I did not," I said. "It's from like 1987. Your father was full of surprises." She laughed, a real laugh, the kind that doesn't hurt anymore. She pressed the sweatshirt against her chest. "Can I keep this?" "It's yours," I said. Later, after dinner, we sat in the family room in the comfortable silence we had inherited from Raymond, the television off, the house quiet, the lamp on low. "He really did know," Camille said. "Everything he set up, he knew exactly what was going to happen." "He knew Diane," I said, "and he knew himself." "Did he know you'd be okay?" I thought about that. "I think," I said carefully, "he knew I would handle it. Whether I'd be okay is something different." I looked at his recliner across the room. "Being okay takes longer." Camille nodded. "Are you getting there?" "Some days," I said honestly. "Most days now." She leaned her head against my shoulder the way she used to do when she was small, and we sat like that for a while, the 2 of us, in the house that Raymond built around us. It was a warm Saturday in April when I drove to Arlington. The cherry trees along the path were blooming, the kind of extravagant, impossible pink that lasts about 10 days every year and makes you understand why people travel across the country to see it. I walked the path slowly, the way you walk somewhere when you are not in a hurry to arrive. I found Raymond's grave without looking at the map. I always could. I had brought tulips, his least favorite flower, which is exactly why I bought them. He had always said tulips looked too pleased with themselves, and I had always disagreed, and now I was going to put them on his grave, and there was nothing he could do about it. It felt like the right kind of final word. I knelt and placed them at the base of the headstone, cleared a few leaves, straightened up. Commander Raymond Mitchell, 32 years of service. Husband, father, the kind of man who planned things. I stood there for a long time. "The tulips are a power move," I told him. "I want you to know that." The breeze moved through the cherry trees. The business is doing well. Peter is good. I'm learning things I should have paid more attention to when you were here to explain them. I paused. The recliner holds. I oiled the frame the way you showed me. You were right that it has another decade in it. Deanne sent a letter in February, not to Patricia, to me directly. No attorneys, no legal language, just a note, 3 paragraphs, written by hand on plain paper. She said she spent so much time watching what you had that she forgot to pay attention to who you were. I looked at the headstone. I thought about that for a while. I decided I believed her. I wrote back. The cherry blossoms drifted on the wind, pale pink against the blue sky. I'm not over you, I said. I want to be honest about that. I don't think I'm supposed to be, and I don't think I want to be. 27 years is a very long time to love someone, and the end of it doesn't undo any of the middle. But I'm here. I'm standing up. I go to work and I come home and I water your rose bushes and I make oatmeal with brown sugar even though there's no one to eat it but me, because some habits are worth keeping. You once told me that the best operations are the ones you plan so thoroughly that by the time they execute, you barely have to be there. I almost smiled. You were barely there, Raymond, and everything still worked. I touched the top of the headstone, one hand, briefly, the way you touch something real and solid when you need to remember what real and solid feels like. I'm figuring it out, I said. One day at a time, same as the Navy, same as everything. I stood there for a few more minutes in the quiet of Arlington, surrounded by the graves of people who had mattered and the families who still came to find them. The cherry blossoms kept falling. The wind moved in long, slow sweeps through the trees, the way it had moved on that Tuesday morning in October when they folded the flag. I had been a Navy commander for 20 years. I had commanded ships. I had trained officers. I had given orders in the dark and navigated by instruments when there was no horizon to reference. I had served my country in the specific, demanding, thankless way that most people never have to. And I had been loved by Raymond Mitchell for 27 years, which was the longest and most important tour of duty of my life, and the one I would not trade for anything. I walked back down the path through the cherry blossoms. The drive home took 40 minutes. I stopped on the way and bought groceries. I came home and made dinner. I sat in Raymond's recliner in the evening with a book and a glass of wine, and the house was quiet around me, and the lamp was warm, and the rose bushes in the garden were coming back after the winter. Some days the grief was still enormous. Some days it sat at a manageable distance and let me breathe. Most days it was simply present, the way a scar is present, the way 27 years of loving someone is present even after they are gone, permanent and personal and entirely your own. That evening I called Camille, then Marcus, then my sister in Portland, who had been asking me to visit for months. Come in June, I told her. I'll come for 2 weeks. 2 weeks, she said. Raymond always said you never took enough time off. He was right about most things, I said. After I hung up, I sat in the quiet for a while. Then I opened my book. Outside, the first fireflies of the season were beginning to appear in the garden. Small, slow lights moving through the dark in their unhurried way, lighting up and going quiet, lighting up again. Raymond used to say that fireflies were nature's version of a signal lamp. Communication in the dark, for anyone patient enough to pay attention. I watched them for a long time. Then I went back to my book. The house was very warm. The rose bushes were coming back. And I was still here, standing on the solid ground that Raymond had spent years quietly building beneath my feet, before I even knew I would need it. That, in the end, is what love looks like when it is done completely and well. Not grand, not dramatic, not the kind that makes noise. The kind that holds. If this story reminded you that real strength is quiet, that real love is patient, and that the truth always arrives, even when it takes the long road, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Thank you for staying with Vivian's story until the very last word. It means everything.